Good afternoon, everyone. This is Brian McCormick with the United Coalition for Advanced Nuclear Power, also known as UCAN Power. And I want to welcome everyone for being here today. Going to give folks a minute or two as they continue to log on, but a lot of exciting activities taking place in the nuclear sector for everyone on this call who's been probably working decades plus on expanding the nuclear opportunity. I think the past few weeks even has just seen tremendous amount of activity, announcements from the private sector, some announcements from the government, different departments and agencies. So we're really happy to have this call scheduled, and we've got two examples of great leaders, thought leaders, and implementers to join us today. Julie Kozeracki with the Department of Energy Loan Program Office, and Glenn Davis, who's the director of the Department of Energy for the state of Virginia. Before I ask Julie to start, I do want to just make a couple comments for those of you who may be new to UCAN Power. Just a reminder that we are an organization that started about 3 years ago, very much focused on deploying and working on the deployment of advanced and small and micro reactors, based upon a lot of our experiences working within the federal government. So I have a number of former Department of Energy staff, Department of Defense staff, OMB, and other places, all the different agencies that are very much focused on getting the nuclear opportunity deployed in front and center. For those of you who have not checked it out, on our website, ucanpower.org, we do have a draft nuclear energy security strategy and a draft executive order that we've had up on our website for a number of months. We continue to refine it with thoughts and input from folks like those of you here on this call, all with the intention for executive branch, Congress, et cetera, for ideas and activities that they should be considering when developing policy for nuclear energy. So my colleague David Sherrington just put the ucanpower.org website in the chat. We encourage you to take a look at that, share it. Of course, in the next week, we do have a presidential election. So we, at a point in time, we'll have the outcome of that election, and we'll have a transition to a new president, a new administration. And it's a great opportunity and time to be engaged with policymakers and others about the great activities taking place in the energy space, nuclear in particular, and things that we need to be doing to further deploy that opportunity. So with that, just I guess about a year and a half ago, we saw the first Department of Energy nuclear energy commercial liftoff report that Julie Kozeracki led for the Department of Energy. It got a lot of attention. It got a lot of conversation going. I would say positive momentum, and they just the department just refreshed it. I guess it came out about a month ago, and so we're going to ask Julie to walk through that, and then we're going to turn to Glenn Davis, who state of Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia, I'll stand corrected, is as we're seeing more and more activity at the state level, and seeing more and more governors participate in this conversation, and state legislatures understanding the need for nuclear and the positive opportunity that nuclear energy has for their state's energy needs. Virginia is just one example, but a leading example where there's a lot of things taking place, a lot of activities that Glenn and his team are implementing. And it's also, I think, an opportunity for a lot of folks when you think through the governor's role, a state legislature's role, and how to make some of this actually happen. So with that, I'm going to ask Julie. I'm going to turn it over to you for your start, and you're going to utilize some slides for a period of time. Folks, we do have both speakers are agreed to some Q&A. We'd ask folks to actually put it into the chat, and if time allows, we'll actually have you jump on and ask your question. But please feel free to start filling up the chat with questions. And with that, Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you. Love the background. I'm sorry I'm so plain here. I'm dialing in from Meridian, Idaho today, but you've got a lot going on your plate, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you so much. Yes, this is beautiful Lake Michigan behind me with the Palisades plant, which is a reactor up in Michigan that is on the path to restarting with the help of a $1.5 billion loan from the Loan Programs Office. It was actually our first 1706 project, which was a program created by the Inflation Reduction Act to reinvest in energy infrastructure. So we could not be more excited about the Palisades project. Very excited to be with you guys today on the 1-month birthday of the update to the nuclear liftoff report. So because the nuclear industry is very small, there's some unfortunate souls here who will have heard or seen a similar version. So I'll try to do the very brief version so we can really do Q&A. So on the next slide is just a quick summary of why we originally wrote and then updated the nuclear liftoff report. So back with the Energy Policy Act of 2005, Congress created the Loan Programs Office specifically to support nuclear, among a number of other clean energy technologies. But we did not have in 2022, when we launched this effort, the applications that we needed to see for successfully deploying new nuclear at scale. So the liftoff reports are a cross-department effort, so not just LPO, but the Office of Nuclear Energy, Office of Technology Transitions, Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, and for this one, work with Idaho and Argonne National Lab as well, where we wanted to identify what it would take to achieve liftoff or deployment at scale for these critical clean energy technologies. And a couple of the key questions we were trying to answer were, what is the value proposition for advanced nuclear? And then do we even need new nuclear when we have all these cheap renewables? And the answer is yes, on the order of 200 gigawatts of new nuclear by 2050 in the US. So that would be tripling our current capacity. And that's especially given the build out of renewables that we are expecting and excited to see here in the US. But since publication in March 2023, a lot has changed. I mean, even today, the CEO of Constellation was quoted in the New York Times saying that in 12 months, Constellation is going to be on the path to building new reactors, which I think would have been unthinkable 6 or 12 months ago. And a lot of that is driven by this unprecedented load growth that we're seeing. A lot of it for AI and data centers, but also a pretty significant portion of it from manufacturing, as well as end-use electrification. There's also been a renewed interest in large light water reactors and AP1000s. So those are the reactors that were built down at Vogtle. And that comes out of there being now a complete constructed and operating design for those reactors, supply chain infrastructure that's been stood up. And there were actually 30,000 workers trained in the course of building Vogtle Unit 3 and 4. So a reassessment of what happened at Vogtle and what it means for capitalizing on that investment going forward. And then finally, this value of the existing fleet. So Palisades actually ceased operations as recently as 2022. And now here in 2024, Holtec is working on restarting it. And of course, everyone's heard the exciting news about Constellation working with Microsoft to restart formally Thermal Island and now the Korean Clean Energy Center. And in addition, a lot of those existing sites also have room for more reactors, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So on the next page, we wanted to refresh and orient people on the unique value proposition of nuclear. And of course, we're going to need multiple energy technologies to be successful at scale. But nuclear is not just clean or carbon-free generation. I actually saw some polling recently that more than half of Americans think that nuclear is not clean or that it does generate greenhouse gases. But it is, by many measures, actually the lowest emissions generator in terms of other electricity sources. But nuclear is also firm or dispatchable capacity that's there when you need it, highest capacity factor of any electricity source. Nuclear uses land very efficiently, generates more megawatt hours per acre than any other source. Nuclear also, and this one I think is really important to think through, is just how much nuclear allows us to use our existing and new transmission infrastructure efficiently. Because if you think about using transmission wires 90+% of the time with nuclear versus 30% of the time with some other sources, it allows you to build out less infrastructure to carry the same amount of electricity. And a lot of all variable decarbonization scenarios require an enormous build out transmission that could be pretty difficult. Nuclear also, though, has really concentrated local economic benefits. So that's not just the high quality, high paying jobs at the plant, but also those knock on economic benefits of having all that clean, firm power. So for instance, in Georgia, now that their grid is bolstered by Vogtle units 1 through 4, you see a lot of EV and battery manufacturers locating in Georgia to take advantage of all that power. And then finally, economy-wide decarbonization is a lot more than just electricity. There's also a lot of industrial processes that need really high temperature heat, really high quality steam, and nuclear is very well positioned to meet a lot of those needs. But what about the cost? So on the next page, there is a view that demonstrates that it is cheaper to decarbonize with nuclear. And so when you include nuclear and other clean, firm sources with renewables and storage, that lowers the overall system costs because you don't have to build as much additional generation storage and transmission. And so these are views from Decarbonizing the State of California, which has great solar availability. And even there, when you add nuclear to the mix, and again, to be clear, we need it all. We need solar, wind, batteries, and nuclear. When you have a mix, you end up reducing the total system cost by about 40%. And there were actually 3 different models they ran in this study, and all of them reached the same conclusion that it's about 40% cheaper when you pair nuclear with renewables. On the next page is just an illustration for US power system decarbonization that sort of explains where these cost reductions come from by showing 2 scenarios. For 2050 decarb in the US. And so the one on the left is one where you have about 40% clean, firm resources like nuclear. And the one on the right is one where you have about 20% clean, firm resources like nuclear. And you can see that when you have closer to 40% clean, firm, that avoids you having to build 1,200 gigawatts of additional generation. And then there are also all these storage and transmission savings that you get as well when you have that really dense, clean, reliable power like nuclear. So the next page is just a clarification of what we mean by advanced nuclear. And so I think this is important because for a lot of people, they may think that advanced just means non-light water reactors, but emphatically, for the Department of Energy, advanced nuclear includes large light water reactors like the Gen 3 Plus reactors built down at Vogtle, the AP1000s, as well as Gen 4 or non-light water reactors. And I think also interesting to note that there's been a lot of press recently, particularly after the very exciting Google and Kairos announcements, Amazon and X Energy announcements, that non-light water reactors are not new. We have built a lot of these technology classes as far back as 1950s, 1960s. Fort St. Vrain was a high temperature gas reactor. And we've had, sodium reactors and lots of different ones. So, it is interesting to note that we have demonstrated these technologies. We know that they work. Although right now, the whole commercial operating fleet in the US are large light water reactors. And on the next page, it's important particularly to understand the difference and the attributes of large and smaller reactors. So there's obviously been a lot of deserved and increasing interest in SMRs or small modular reactors. But it's important to know that we did make the reactors bigger on purpose over time. So for instance, the first commercial reactor at Shippingport was 60 megawatts, and we pushed them up in size up to 1,400 megawatts down at Grand Gulf in Mississippi, because you get really powerful economies of scale from big reactors, just because you have so many more megawatts to spread those costs across. And so you can see here, these are cost scenarios for large and small boiling water reactors. So similar design, but different sizes. Pretty consistently, the large reactors are cheaper dollars per kilowatt. And that translates to being cheaper dollars per megawatt hour or cheaper power price. However, when you look at the total reactor cost, just because the SMRs are fewer megawatts, you end up with a smaller price tag for the reactor overall. And of course, there aren't a huge number of organizations that can support $10 billion plus projects. But for people who are looking for huge amounts of cheap bulk power, large light water reactors are really essential for that electricity production. And SMRs are going to be particularly important for things like replacing retiring coal, applications where you just don't need, 2,200 megawatts of capacity, and in particular, some of the industrial applications that require higher temperature heat and steam. But I will note that the M in SMR should not be silent, and you got to actually move a lot of that spend to the factory setting to help make up for some of these lost economies of scale. So on the next page is a view that when we, talk about tripling U.S. nuclear capacity, building 200 gigawatts by 2050, that sounds intimidating, but helpful to know that we have done it before and we can do it again. In 1974, we brought 12 reactors online for a total of 10.5 gigawatts. And if we hit a steady state of about 13 gigawatts per year by 2040, 2041, we could hit that 200 gigawatt number by 2050. But on the next page, you'll see that something about having a fleet that was largely built in the 1970s and 80s. If you go back to slide 9, is that it is really critical to invest in subsequent license renewals to keep this capacity online through 2050. So when the plant open, you get a 40-year license from the NRC. An initial license renewal gets you to 60 years, which we have a lot of. And then the subsequent license renewals that let you operate for 80 years are essential for ensuring that all of this capacity remains online and producing clean, firm power out through 2050. So not to be taken for granted. Now, on the next page is both my favorite and my least favorite chart from the new report, which is that in the US, even though we have a fleet of exclusively large light water reactors and they're only boiling water reactors and pressurized water reactors, we've built over 50 different designs. And although there weren't actually that many different designers, there were so many changes, customizations, and tweaks to the nuclear island, the balance of plant, that each of these verticals is maybe you could call a design class, and then the horizontal separations are changes of at least 50 megawatts, even just within one of those design classes. And so when you hear people ask, well, why haven't we seen, real learning curve benefits over time? Part of that is because we've effectively done 50 first-of-a-kind projects. And you can imagine that doing 10 reactors within a design helps you really come down the cost curve, gain experience versus doing 10 first-of-a-kind projects. The other thing is that when you have multiple designs with different specifications, it's also a lot less efficient to stand up the supply chain to support that and to build out the workforce versus consolidating. So it's going to be really essential for the industry to down select designs as soon as possible so that you can build up multiple reactors within a design. And the next page has the last fun fact about our existing fleet, which is that 20 operating nuclear sites and 5 formerly operating nuclear sites are in communities that are eligible for the Energy Community Tax Credit bonus. So the IRA created 2 powerful tax credits for new nuclear. One of those is the 48E investment tax credit. The other is the 45Y production tax credit. The PTC, it makes more sense for restarts where it's lower CapEx, but for new builds, the ITC is really powerful, and being in one of these energy communities makes you eligible for the 50% investment tax credit which for folks keeping score at home is buy one reactor, get one free. And the other benefit from using a lot of these existing sites is that not only have you done all the siting and characterization for the initial licensing and have access to the water interconnection, but you also, possibly most importantly, have communities who know and understand and love nuclear. The folks who live right near a nuclear power plant, even excluding the workers at the plant, have the highest favorability, like 90+% of those plants. So that's a really, really powerful asset for us to capitalize on. And the Office of Nuclear Energy and some of the national labs put out 2 studies in the last few months that just at our existing nuclear sites, there is room for 60 to 95 gigawatts of new nuclear. And some of that's because a lot of these sites were designed for 4 or more reactors, but we only ever built 1 or 2. So there's a lot of room. But where are we today? So on the next page is a framework from the initial report around the key stages for achieving liftoff. And the first of those is what we call a committed order book. So signed contracts to have reactors under construction. And so even, since we published the report a month ago, there have been some interesting announcements. And in the report, we draw a distinction between ensuring that there are signed contracts as opposed to MOUs or letters of intent. So there is real momentum building toward inevitability, but of course will be essential to ensure that there's enough within each design to really deliver a lot of those projects on time and on budget, and then be able to recognize the full scale industrialization benefits. On the next page is a view that if we wait, it will get harder and more expensive. So I mentioned earlier that if we hit this 13 gigawatt a year run rate in about 2041, we can pretty easily meet 200 gigawatts by 2050. If you wait even 5 years, and you all of a sudden have to put closer to 20 gigawatts on the grid per year, you're going to really strain the workforce and so overbuild the supply chain that you will be left with stranded assets, and it will just be much more expensive and much more inefficient to build out. The next page is a view of, folks get very focused on the reactor design, but there are a lot of different roles that have to be filled successfully for these projects to be delivered. And consortium models can help aggregate demand to get you up to that 5 to 10 reactors by design. And we introduce a couple of different concepts. For example, that could look like a couple of utilities working together where they pick the same design and are able to share best practices, workforce, and come down the cost curve for all the ratepayers faster. I think we've seen interesting developments in the aggregated tech offtake model. Industrial companies could play a similar role. And then the developer model is interesting where, in solar and wind, for example, they really took off at utility scale when you had developers providing turnkey assets. But in nuclear, we have largely looked to each individual utility to manage their whole project, which has led partially to this, 50 first-of-a-kind projects outcome. But selecting reactor design is very important, but it is just step number 1. When, for example, from the Loan Programs Office perspective, when folks come to us for new nuclear, we're not really financing a new reactor, we're financing a multi-year complex construction project. And so filling those roles is really important. And the next page really demonstrates that, because this is the cost estimate of Vogtle over time. And so, of course, you'll hear people talk about, Vogtle more than doubled, cost overruns. But if you actually break it down to when Westinghouse went bankrupt and Southern sort of stepped up more as the project manager in their owner role, they reset the budget to within about 25% of where it landed 7 years later, which, accounting for COVID, is pretty close. And I think underscores the importance of having folks with the right expertise, the right incentives, in the right roles to make sure that you are developing a detailed, mature cost estimate that can help narrow the bands for what you expect. And so the book, How Big Things Get Done, illustrates some important lessons around, you know, how much of this, for example, was cost overrun versus how much was cost underestimation at the front end, which is an important question for all of our new nuclear projects going forward. The next page has some additional data from Vogtle, which is that there was major improvement just going from Unit 3 to Unit 4. So some of the key milestones went from taking over a year to under 3 months, which is a testament to even just building 2 within the same design gets you a lot of improvement just because so much of the learning is design specific and learned by doing, that the build experience is invaluable and tough to disaggregate, you know, given the shared resources. But Unit 3 was about 30% more, Unit 4 was about 30% more efficient than Unit 3, about 20% cheaper. But what would the next AP1000s look like? So the next page is a summary of an MIT report that came out this summer from Kuru Shirvan that looks at Vogel's cost, and this is all in dollars per kilowatt, which is, you know, we as the overnight capital cost here. So as if you were able to build the plant overnight without accruing interest. So Vogel's cost in-year dollars was about 11,000 per kilowatt. But let's inflate that into 2024 dollars. Let's call that about 15,000 a kilowatt. From a bottoms-up analysis, there were about $3,000 a kilowatt of costs that were true first-of-a-kind costs, so sort of unavoidable first-of-a-kind costs that any first-of-a-kind design is going to incur. And those are things like standing up the supply chain infrastructure, training workers on the construction for the first time. And then there were some separate costs, which, you know, we have as the sort of Vogel-specific inefficiencies here. And those were things like using the NRC's Part 52 process with an incomplete design, which led to, you know, a cycle of rework and delay and going back and forth with the NRC. But now that there's a complete design, using that NRC Part 52 process as intended should be a lot more streamlined. So that leaves you with the cost estimate for the next AP1000 of about 8,300 a kilowatt. And then underscoring economies of scale, if you're able to build 4 at the same site, get that even farther down to about 7,500 a kilowatt. But what does that mean for LCOE? So the next page is a LCOE walk down, and I will say in the report, please check out the LCOE limitations and levers section because you know, the people want LCOE, and so we give them LCOE, but it is a flawed metric that misses a lot for nuclear and other sources. So from left to right, if you use the actual values from Vogtle, you get to an LCOE of about $126 a megawatt hour. That's a lot lower than you may have seen reported because a lot of other estimates use interest rates as high as 8%. But Vogtle, using LPO and other sources, was able to get debt closer to 3.5%, which makes an enormous difference in the overall cost of nuclear. But let's say we inflate that into today's dollars, put ourselves in our slightly higher interest rate environment to see what that would look like. But just load it up with the IRA benefits. So those light green bars are all of a sudden increasing, for example, the proportion of the LPO debt to cover 80% of the total project cost, adding in a 40% investment tax credit, and then being able to depreciate the entire nuclear power plant in 5 years, which is an IRA benefit. So that already gets you under $100 a megawatt hour, and that is assuming the same cost as Vogtle inflated into today's dollars. So now, if we add in the expected cost and schedule reductions, you get down somewhere to closer to $60 or $80 a megawatt hour, which feels pretty achievable, especially for some of these big hyperscale and industrial customers who need a lot of electricity and are really interested in that electricity being carbon-free. On the next page is just very briefly one of those major drawbacks of LCOE I mentioned, which is that LCOE really captures the capital recovery period, so call that max 30 years while you're paying the debt pack, for example. But nuclear assets can be operating for, call it 80 years. And so after that capital recovery period, you have another 50 years of cheap, clean, reliable power. And nuclear operates in a really tight, predictable band. And it is difficult just because of net present value and discount rates to really quantify those benefits out in the future, but very important for policymakers to take into account that these are real assets that will be providing clean, firm power to to ratepayers and the children and grandchildren of ratepayers 40, 50, 60, 70 years from now. And to appreciate that an investment today in a multi-generational asset pays off for many decades. So the next page here is where I will leave us, actually just on page 20 there, is a synthesis of some of the key challenges and barriers that are still holding back nuclear from reaching full commercial liftoff. One of those is that market power prices don't consistently compensate nuclear for the value it provides. So system modeling can consistently show the value of including nuclear in the system. Clean, firm standards, similar to renewable portfolio standards, could also be a very powerful tool. And a standard value or price for clean, firm power that actually prices in the decarbonization and reliability benefits that nuclear has would help stop those false comparisons to just natural gas by itself or just solar by itself, and help make more of an apples to apples comparison to something like natural gas paired with carbon capture or solar paired with long duration energy storage. But finally, broader electricity market reforms would likely be helpful for really incentivizing investment in new generation assets. But of course, most potential customers cite cost or cost overrun risk as the primary barrier to moving forward new nuclear. So we have more in the report around all of the tools that the federal government has put on the table. So for example, we heard a lot about people saying that they need something that feels or looks like cost overrun insurance. As we just walked through, the investment tax credit covers the entire cost of the project, including cost overruns above the initial budget. So that's really the government offering to pay 30 to 50% of the overrun, and LPOs, can structure contingent debt that you only have to draw on if you need it to help support through different cost scenarios. And then, of course, there are also a number of project management best practices we detail in the report that are important for actually reducing those expected and unexpected costs. Finally, the U.S. is a little out of practice. Vogtle is the first start to finish construction in 35 years. And so funding constructability research as opposed to just the more basic reactor science could be really important for helping us institutionalize that. And the integrated project delivery model also offers a lot for aligning incentives between players. So I will leave it there. And I see that there's some questions coming through, but defer to you, Brian and Jeff, if better to hand over to Glenn and take those at the end, or if we should go through some of those now.
Yeah, Julie, a lot of information. Thank you very much. I think it would probably be best if we go with Glenn. Some of these questions are going to probably overlap a little bit. You did touch base already on LCOE, and I see that there's at least one question in there on that. So I'll let you review the questions and start thinking about the answers. But in the meantime, we're going to go to Glenn Davis, who's the Director of Energy at the Virginia Department of Energy. And Glenn has a number of states, as I mentioned at the top of the call, a number of states, governors, state legislatures, et cetera, are taking a lot of time to think about nuclear again, think about the new opportunities, either with the existing large reactors or what the states may need to be doing to prepare for SMRs and micro reactors in their communities, whether that's through commercial deployment or possibly in conjunction with the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, and others. So Glenn has a number of new tools in Virginia, and again, as being the laboratory that the states are, including Commonwealths. There's probably a lot of information. I know there's a lot of information sharing taking place amongst the states. So Glenn, why don't I just turn it over to you and start with the overview of some of the new things that you guys have incorporated in Virginia, and then we'll go into Q&A.
Sounds good, Brian. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Julie for the update on the Liftoff report. As I've been giving speeches, my team has been putting together slide decks. We've used a number of those slides, specifically the value prop slide, which has been very helpful when talking to people that are emotionally passionate about clean energy and has them looking at nuclear through a different lens. To understand what Virginia is doing today, you kind of have to understand a little bit about where we were and where we are today from a demand perspective. In 2020, Virginia, the General Assembly, was looking at some modeling, and we had almost zero economic progress and economic growth in Virginia. And then also at the same time, we were looking at 1 to 2% year-over-year demand growth. Virginia put a couple of really bad policies in place from a regulatory standpoint that, beside the fact, we didn't see much demand coming around. The governor comes into office in 2022, Governor Youngkin. He realizes that 1 to 2% demand growth is not accurate. It's going to be much higher than that. And he launches the All-American, All-the-Above Energy Plan. There's a place for wind, there's a place for solar, there's a place for gas, there's a place for nuclear. Everything has its bucket. And how do we use it all properly to meet the demand that we're going to see as we go forward? His whole pillar was we want it reliable, we want it affordable, and we want it increasingly clean. And that's what we still strive to reach today. Fast forward to last year when we were updating things and Dominion's last IRP came out, and we realized that we're about 6 to 7% year-over-year growth in energy demand. And that's because Virginia has had significant economic investments, over $7 billion in the last 2.5 years. We were recently named the best state in the nation for business by CNBC, and all that is giving us great attention, but with economic opportunity comes huge demand in energy. And so that's kind of where we pivot on, okay, how do we solve this? The governor's first answer was going with the small modular reactors. He was and still is committed to making sure that we supply one, if not the first, one of the first commercially operational SMRs in the nation to start supporting some of that increased development. But as we look at, trying to bring and kind of bridge some of this other stuff, how do we do it? Recognizing we have two problems in the Commonwealth. The first is that growth in demand. How do we get the coverage of the 6 to 7% year-over-year growth? At the same time, like almost every other state, we have a shortage of transmission and distribution. So even if we could wave that magic wand today, how do we get the power generation to where the load is? And those were the two big challenges that we have been looking at. The first answer we came up with was to maximize our use of federal dollars going out to federal grants. Our governor was very clear that the federal funds are out there and we're going to go and compete for more than our fair share. Over the last 5 years, up until about 1.5 years ago, the 5 years preceding, Virginia managed about $75 million in federal grants under our roof. Since 2022, over until 2027, we're on track to manage over $1 billion in federal grants under roof. The Solar for All grant itself was $156 million. Total, I think we're just over $500 million today in federal grants, whether they're in solar, energy efficiencies, hydrogen, a whole bunch of different areas that we can use dollars to help start plugging some of these needs with new, innovative, clean opportunities. The next thing we ran down was how do we create more innovation here in the Commonwealth? And that was with the Power Innovation Fund. The governor a couple of years ago asked for $10 million for this Power Innovation Fund. He was given $4 million to see kind of what we could do with it. And we recently put it out into an RFP. It was a 45-day RFP for grant applications for innovative projects that we can move forward, whether it be for power generation, whether it's for transmission distribution efficiency. And we got 34 applications in, totaling about $26 million. On the good side, I think it makes a heck of a case for us asking the General Assembly in January for significantly more money to do another round of this. On the negative side, obviously $4 million doesn't come close for us giving everyone money. So we're narrowing down the top applications. But what we found was having that type of challenge out there really lets you know what's out there in the industry. Entrepreneurs are great with coming up with ideas, and they're typically ideas that the government does not know about. And so we learned about a lot of different industry innovation that sits out there that we want to bring forward. We want to bring forward in Virginia. And so we're going to continue down that path. The second program that we developed was the Clean Energy Innovation Bank. It's something that I think I first mentioned Brian about a little over a year ago at one of your conferences. It's taken us a year to kind of put into place. And what that allows us to do is work with the DOE LPO office, even some of the EPA funds and some private sectors to bring in dollars into the Commonwealth and create a SEFI, a state energy finance institution, and then give out grants and give out loans that help bring these opportunities to the Commonwealth and make them a reality. Projects that typically would not be funded otherwise by traditional financing at a bank. We have a number of projects today. We have a nuclear project in front of us that we're getting ready to work with the LPO on and take through them. We have a great carbon capture and use project that we've already started taking through the LPO. It's an entity that literally captures carbon, turns it into commercial grade battery, graphite for battery. And so this is a great opportunity for us to not only take small, medium-sized projects and help with the funding side, but to take these very big projects and help to get significant funding from LPO, from that $100 billion fund that they've got out there that they've been trying to put on the street. And they're just an amazing entity to work with from a partnership perspective on identifying and helping to vet these opportunities. And that's the biggest thing. If there's any states out there, one of the biggest challenges that I was asked about when I was putting this together is, Glenn, how are you going to vet these? I have a business background. The Secretary of Commerce here has a business background, took her business public back in the day. But there's a difference between vetting a $100 million company and something doing nuclear projects and that sort of thing. And what's great about the LPO is they are the entity when it comes to vetting these large projects and going through the due diligence factor. So as they go through and bringing the outside entity to help do that through due diligence, we're seeing the same stuff from the state. And our position has been, if it's approved by the DOE LPO, it's approved by the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so that's helped tremendously there. And then as we continue looking forward, what this, I guess before I go forward, what this actually does from a project perspective, let's say there's an entity out there that needs $100 million. They would come to us, and if we're pairing with the LPO, in most cases, the state would put up between 3% and 5%. That would mean that the entity itself would put up between 15% and 17%, whatever it takes to equal 20%. And then we can go to the LPO for the additional 80%. So when it comes to the bottom line, the state puts up $3 to $5 million, 15 to 17 million is put up by the business. And then the LPO puts up the $80 million that the bank loans out there. We're able to put out our money in one of three ways, which is extremely flexible for a state if there's other states looking at doing this. The first way, as you'd expect, is cash in the deal. We literally can, if someone wants $100 million, we can cut a $3 million check. The second way is we can put real estate in the deal and be vested that manner. The third way is what we really like at the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that's that we can open up a loan loss reserve fund for our 3 to 5%. So basically, we put on the Commonwealth's balance sheet, if it's a $100 million deal, we create a loan loss reserve with a $5 million balance. And as long as we make good deals and everyone pays their payments according to schedule, the Commonwealth isn't out any dollars, whether it be investment capital or lost capital, that sort of thing. So that helps tremendously when it comes to helping to get the dollars from the General Assembly when we explain that those monies stay in the Commonwealth because we're making very good decisions on very good projects. So those are some of the things that we've been able to do to help facilitate some of this growth. And the last thing I'll mention is that our governor has been very clear that not only do we want the power generation inside the Commonwealth, we want the supply chain as well. And a lot of the programs that both the Power Innovation Fund and our bank can invest in are supply chain side projects. So if there's an entity out there that they've got the technology in place, but they're looking to stand up the manufacturing for a clean energy project, we can use these programs to also assist with standing up the supply chain for that as well. And a little plug for Virginia, we've got the widest, deepest port on the East Coast out of the Port of Virginia. So those that need to build things and export some of them, you can't have a better place than Virginia to do that from. So with that and the overview of those two programs, I'll kind of leave it there. But we found that innovation with these programs has really created a lot of opportunity for us as we look forward to solving some of the gaps in energy demand that we're seeing.
Great. Glenn, thank you. The How many people, when you're looking at these deals, do you have a lot of people knocking on your guys' door?
Brian, it's been quick. So we haven't put anything out there on the bank except for the press release. And we got 7 deals almost in the first week and a half. I mean, we've only had it out there with that press release for, I don't even think, a month yet. And we got 7 sizable deals. 2 of them we're already talking to the LPO about. So that's been exciting. And on the smaller in Power Innovation Fund, we literally put it out there for 45 days. And we got 34 applications to go through. So we've had tremendous response on both.
Okay. And for folks who didn't catch it, Glenn used an acronym, SEFI. That's the State Energy Finance Initiative. Is that right? So
Institution.
Institute. That's done in conjunction with the DOE.
It is.
Right. Okay. Before we open up for questions, there's one I do want to get to with you. The Navy put out an RFI recently. It touches on a number of places, but a fair number of them are focused on Virginia. Anything you want to talk about with regards to the Navy RFI?
Oh, so we're really excited about that. Before this job, I spent 10 years in the General Assembly, and then 5 years prior to that on City Council in Virginia Beach. And most of you know are probably the largest veteran population in the U.S. And but dealing with the Navy, it's a mission readiness issue. Energy always has been. So it wasn't a surprise, but we were very excited to see that 7 bases were chosen to be examined inside the RFI for a SMR or nuclear reactor, and 4 of those were in Virginia. We had Quantico, we had Oceana out of Virginia Beach, and 2 other locations chosen. And so we're really excited that 4 of those 7 facilities are in Virginia. And I think that just speaks to the leadership that we've been able to create here in Virginia, obviously with the existing nuclear workforce and the supply chain we have. I saw Tom with Framatome on here. Framatome, BWXT being in Lynchburg. We've got so much of the supply chain for the Navy nuclear stuff already. I think that makes a big difference.
Great. Julie, if there's anything you want to add about Navy RFI, you're welcome to. If not, I'm going to ask you a question about the financial community, and then we'll open up for Q&A.
Yeah, no, just that the Navy is asking for input, right, on how to best structure that arrangement. So I think that's a really compelling opportunity because there's obviously a lot of different ways that could work to make sure that you are supporting something that's scalable and probably has knock-on commercial and other benefits. So I'm really looking forward to people sharing some of their best ideas with the Navy on that.
Yep. And I don't want to just wave the Navy flag, but also obviously we have Eielson Air Force Base and the team up there continuing to work on that deployment with Jeff Waxman and folks. So, Julie, question: you speak with a lot of different companies in the nuclear space. This very much seems like a financial conversation. We saw that there was a recent group of financial investment types that went out to Idaho National Lab. I think you were part of that conversation. What can you tell us about what the financial community is thinking about from the risk side, et cetera, as we all are bringing these various pieces of the conversation to the table?
Certainly. And first of all, I will say Jeff will kill me if I don't say that they're building Pele at Idaho, which is separate from the Eielson project, but both
Yes.
both important. Yes. So I think what was most interesting about some of the Idaho conversations, and I touched on this in the presentation a little bit, is again this sort of underappreciation of the IRA benefits that I get the sense that a lot of people just didn't even try to run the numbers because they just sort of assumed that nuclear would be uneconomical or there's just no way that it would work. And when you really step people through the arithmetic of, taking out 30 to 50% of the capital cost, of having really cheap financing for up to 80% of the project. And I saw a comment in the chat. I will say the 80% is not hypothetical. Like we can and have done that. And it is, yes, a, custom negotiation. We go through a rigorous due diligence process and negotiation for every deal. And a lot of that is going to be dependent on the credit quality of that project, but that is very much something that we can do, which makes a huge impact on the cost of nuclear. And then I think the other piece is about the tax credits, right? And so I saw a question in the chat about, well, how do we know it's buy one, get one free if they expire? But the interesting thing about when the IRA tax credits expire is that it's either 2032 or until the US electricity sector emissions are at or below 25% of 2022 levels. And we may have a little bit of time in getting there. So I think it is very possible that the IRA tax credits will be around for a while. And the tax credits and the LPO in conjunction with our grant programs are essential for scaling nuclear. And I think part of that is also a reflection of the interesting appropriations that LPO gets. So I think a lot of people, sometimes they're like, 1706, right? So like 250 billion. That money's not sitting somewhere. It's not in a coffer. It's just the ability for, Treasury to issue notes. There's 5 billion of appropriated credit subsidy that allows us to do up to 250 billion in lending authority, which is a really efficient use of those dollars. You're getting basically a 50x multiplier on those dollars. And so I think walking people through how you can use the grant programs, the ITCs, the flexible LPO structure really started to make it more real for people. And so I look forward to there being a bunch of 24-year-old Wall Street analysts running these numbers instead of me, because I'm sure there's lots of different scenarios that will be compelling for people.
Great. And to your point about Jeff Waxman, he usually joins these calls. I don't think he's on today. I hope he's not, because I know he's very, very busy getting a lot of momentum going. But also just a hat tip to the folks at the Idaho National Lab for hosting that conversation with you all. And Glenn and I actually had an opportunity recently to visit with INL, and great work that's taking place there. Okay, folks, we're going to open this up for the Q&A. Andrew Patterson, you're going to be first up. So if you go ahead and unmute your microphone, I will ask folks, please get to your question. There's a fair amount of commentary in some of these, so let's get to the questions so we can go through as many as possible. And with that, Andrew.
Yeah, two quick ones. Big fan of Julie. I think she does a great job of presenting the material. Firstly, Glenn talked about an 80% loan. Julie can comment that that's not typically the loan value. It's negotiated more like 65, 70%, depending on the credit rating of the project, is what Julie mentioned. Is that correct? Is that your understanding, Julie?
Yeah, 80% is real and achievable. It's not like a hypothetical maximum, exactly as you suggest. A lot of it is really based on the profile of the project, of the borrower, but it's not a bait and switch where we say we do 80, but really we're going to do 60. Like that is very real and achievable, particularly for projects of high credit quality.
Yeah, and I think to Glenn's point, Virginia can make a difference on the credit quality, and that's where the program can have leverage.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, I think there's sometimes these barbell misperceptions about the LPO, where sometimes people think it's this like draconian investment grade only, no risk.
No.
And other people think sometimes it's this, like a grant program where we're taking fundamental technology risk, when in reality, it's somewhere in the middle, where our guiding principle from Congress is the reasonable prospect of repayment. So our portfolio includes both speculative and investment grade lending. And so particularly for nuclear, as I mentioned, it's not really financing a reactor, it's financing this multi-year complex construction project. And so you can either, to do that in a project finance way, there's a lot of buttoning up and checking that you have to do. So the fast way to move through that is to provide, something like a guarantee that helps improve the credit quality.
Right. So the main question is, I think the Liftoff report is understandably US centric, but I'm in the camp, Julie, who believes that the biggest opportunity in the next 5 years is going to be SMR deployment in Europe. I'm sitting over here in Europe now. I don't believe the myth that you have to deploy in the US first. I think NuScale in Romania is an example. I think the carbon policy in Europe is much stronger. I think the opportunities for data centers and industrial applications in Europe, facing a lot of push in their chemical sector to use nuclear, is changing the ball game. And so I wanted to hear how the DOE is talking about the opportunity in Europe rather than waiting for the USA.
So, as you mentioned, the Liftoff reports sort of by design are focused on liftoff in the US, but the international markets really, the DOE structure reflects that, right? There is an office, an international office within the Office of Nuclear Energy, basically fully dedicated to this. But to me, I think one of the most telling data points is the AP1000, right? So, we're very excited about Poland moving forward in the AP1000. I think there was another announcement last week about some other folks in Europe. And, folks want American reactors, American technologies, but I do often hear that they're like, well, if it's so great, why don't you build it in the US first? And so I think, for example, the completion of Vogtle units 3 and 4, the fact that you now have a complete constructed operating design is really attractive. And so I think that we got to do both. It's yes, and we got to build them in the US and abroad, because of course, building a reactor, you're entering into a long-term relationship, right? That is an 80, if not 100-year relationship with, the reactor vendor, the supply chain lead, lots of other folks, and people want that partner to be the United States. But I do think it would be a real shame if we didn't do our best to see what we could do to deploy domestically in order to support deploying internationally.
So, Julie, thanks for taking that question, because the international component of this is obviously significant. And just maybe a thought, loan program office funds are available for components, not just for deployment. So there is a lot of technology, whether it's fuel manufacturing, et cetera, that could be done domestically for export opportunity.
Yes, that's right. So the projects have to be in the United States, but the products can be exported. So if, for example, you had a factory in the US, which again, as I will mention, the M and SMR cannot be silent. And so I'm looking forward to real incredible plans for SMR factories. Those would be eligible for LPO. And if you were exporting some of those reactors abroad, that would work. I do think one thing to keep in mind is the current time limit on LPO. So right now, most of our money, so for example, all of 1706 has to be conditionally committed by September 2026, spent by 2031. That's a pretty tight deadline for new nuclear. So just important for folks to keep that current congressional limit in mind.
Copy. Okay. Bud Albright, you're up next, and then Rob Sweeney, you're going to be right after that. So, Bud, you had a question for both Julie and Glenn.
Yeah, just a very quick question. Who in each of your respective areas is in charge of coal to nuclear issues?
But I'll start. So I have a team underneath me that handles all our post-mined areas. But I take all the nuclear stuff in through me. It is an area that we have focused on tremendously, as we are heavily committed to power behind the meter, looking at data centers co-located with SMRs. And some of our land in Southwest Virginia is ideal for that. So if there's some interest, please reach out to me, and I'll jump on it and get some of my guys involved in it as well from the coal mine side.
And on our side,
I think I do well. Sorry, Julie.
No, I was going to say on our side at DOE, there's some folks in the Office of Nuclear Energy, and then GAIN as part of INL. So Christine King and her team have some dedicated resources and events focused on coal to nuclear. So I would check out GAIN as part of Idaho National Lab.
Super. Thank you.
Thanks, Bud. Good to see you. Rob, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julie. Appreciate you teasing out the nuance there on my question with regard to the ITCs and the timeline and how that can be projected to actually get a 2-for-1. So appreciate that. I just have a quick follow-up question because we're talking a little bit about manufacturing, the opportunities that might be available to expand in Virginia. And can you give us a little color on the participation by obviously LPO in financing for manufacturing, but also how do you play with those that also might want to use some of the XM manufacturing capacity that they're supporting for exports here as well. So there's 2 swim lanes there for supporting U.S. manufacturers. So if you can add a little color on that, that would be great.
Sure. So, I mean, we're looking with DOE, LPO on everything we can get. Some of the stuff that comes in isn't big enough for LPO involvement, and we try to find a different channel for that. Manufacturing is a big piece of the equation as long as it's clean energy. However, transmission falls in there now. Some mine reclamation stuff falls in there. So it can be a number of different things. But we are committed on the supply chain piece of it, and we have a number of different channels to take it down. I don't know if that got to the full question you had there, but I think it covered both sides, if I'm thinking of it properly.
And for my piece, I heard something about manufacturing, so I'll just, there is also the 48C investment tax credit for manufacturing, and all tax credits are written to be paired with LPO loans. So you'll hear something about the federal support restrictions. So for instance, it's tough for LPO to loan to projects that are receiving grants, but LPO pairs very nicely with tax credits, like the supply chain tax credit, like the investment production tax credits. And LPO also pairs very nicely with state money. So for example, Palisades was the recipient of grant money from the state of Michigan, and that works very well with the LPO loan. And so the same principles apply for both power generation as well as for manufacturing.
Great. Giles, you had a question on percentages, which I think is, well, we'll go ahead and let you ask if you unmute yourself and then.
Yep, thank you very much. So Julie, you talked about the Liftoff report on advanced nuclear. So there are other Liftoff reports on hydrogen storage. I mean, there are several of them. And so I was wondering if you could talk about, is there an overall strategy for the power sector? And so in other words, does DOE have specific objectives regarding the composition of the future power sector? So how much nuclear, how much wind, solar, storage? Do we have an objective?
Yeah, so, in the United States, better or worse, we are private sector led, government enabled, but I will say in the Liftoff report, we identify that without, call it 20 to 40% clean firm, it's going to be very difficult, very expensive to decarbonize. So there are, of course, multiple paths that you can take, but we, share a perspective in the report that if you're able to get that 20 to 40% clean firm, that is the most efficient. What you want to mix, right? You want a mix of clean firm resources. So that's things like nuclear, hydro, gas with carbon capture, variable generation like wind and solar, and then battery and storage technology. And so when you have a nice mix of all of those assets, that's when you get the best outcomes and the best price point. So I think that's what a lot of the literature supports. And so there's a couple papers in there that run a number of different scenarios with different percentages of those compositions. Of course, there's a lot of things, the regional mix, other areas, but as guiding principles, that's what the literature has shown is probably most efficient, that 20-40% clean firm.
Yeah, and I can add to it just a little. As we look at this in Virginia, I mean, we're going to need an extra 20 to 30 gigawatts of power built out by 2035. And that's not coming from solar or wind, especially when you start looking at, what is it, 10 acres for every, or 10,000 acres for every megawatt you're building. So, there's no way we're going to hit it without nuclear. That is going to be the main go-to to solve that increased demand. So today we have 30% nuclear. I think we're a little over 50% gas. We're in single digits when it comes to solar and wind. Everything's going to pivot up a little bit, but the majority of that growth is going to come from nuclear. There's just nothing else firm, dispatchable that can supply the power of nuclear in a clean and condensed environment of land.
I will say some, if not a lot of that will come from solar and wind. Like the growth rates for solar and wind are really impressive and things we should all be excited about. But again, it's solar and nuclear. It's not solar or nuclear. We need lots of both.
Okay, I'm going to turn
Thank you very
to,
much.
sorry, Giles, was that cover your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay, we're going to go to Patrick Hines on regulatory changes and off takers.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And thank you, Julie and Glenn. As a Virginia resident, it's exciting to see it seems like every week there's better news coming out about nuclear. But yeah, my question is, obviously, I guess this goes to both of you guys. You've been engaging with potential off takers that have come in the last couple of years. Are they before committing, are they looking for more regulatory changes, building off the Advance Act and NEMA? Do they want more to address things like radiation, or are there specific regulatory problems that they bring up?
So I can start with that, and then maybe would love to hear Glenn's perspective. I will say, people love to scapegoat the NRC. But from many perspectives, they are not the bottleneck. Like, largely, people have not been applying to the NRC. I think a lot of people overestimate how many of these SMR companies have actually applied and are like in real engagement with the NRC. There are actually a number of active COLs at existing and new sites, which you can look at on the NRC's website. Like, there's a active COL at Turkey Point where you could start building AP1000s. North Anna, for example, right, went through this process. I think it was for the ESBWR, but that means that there's been a huge amount of siting and characterization and licensing work already done. So the other thing that we go through in the report is it's important to understand how the NRC licensing paths are intended to be used. And so when you look at the Vogtle experience, the NRC, for example, created Part 52 to be responsive to industry, because Part 50 was the two parts, right? And so a lot could happen in between. And so they were like, all right, great, we'll put them together, streamline that. And then Vogtle went and used that at Westinghouse, with a relatively incomplete design, where then they had to go back and forth and make changes. But the NRC is working really hard to streamline, and they have said, and Chair Hansen has said a number of times, that if you have standardized, repeatable designs, that is a lot easier. So, once again, I talked about the multiple inefficiencies of doing 50 first-of-kind designs. You have to train up and staff 50 different, NRC review teams for 50 different first-of-a-kind designs, versus having a team that can get really good at reviewing and working through the first design. That's going to be really powerful. So, we're really excited about the Advance Act passing. But from my perspective, the real holdup is it is the emotionally driven fears about cost overrun. That is the single largest bottleneck. It's not the NRC. It's not like hypothetical fuel supply chain. Like, it is fears about cost overrun. And so I think that's part of why, we really try to underscore how the IRA benefits help address that, because I think if we get to a steady state, I think the NRC should be able to rise to the occasion.
And from a state perspective, Patrick, every state's different. Virginia is a very open state for power generation development. Basically, you can come in here tomorrow, plop a data center down on land that's been zoned for it, and put an SMR behind it, and there's no regulatory impacts that would prevent you from doing that. There's no legislation that prevents you from doing that. You obviously, the NRC process, you still have to go through. We don't have anything control over that. DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality, is probably going to get involved on just the water side, but the governor's already been working to help expedite any permits that come through related to energy to make sure that we can get things on process and build as quick as possible. So some states are a little different, but in Virginia, there's no ban against power behind the meter, no ban on any particular type of energy, and we're expediting what permits that you may need from DEQ.
Great. Appreciate the question. And that's all good news to me. So thank you.
Patrick, we'll have to follow up with you on radiation. I'm not sure that's a topic that these speakers are prepared to talk about. But
can I give one soundbite just because we mentioned the Navy earlier? So sailors who live on submarines right next to nuclear reactors, in the course of a year, they receive 1/30th, so like 3% of the background radiation that we get up here in the course of a year. So I think that largely, like, there were a lot of like radiation sort of scare studies, but the facts are really on nuclear side on that one.
Yeah,
Right.
I think on that point, it's that's more like public engagement, where this kind of excitement about nuclear presents an opportunity to kind of educate the public about radiation. So thank you, guys.
Yep. Okay, Dan Goodwin, you're up next.
Thank you, Brian. So my question was about the amount of additional capacity that you're saying could be added through adding new reactors at existing sites. So yeah, I believe it was 65 gigawatts.
60 to 95.
60 to 95. So are there any cost estimates available on how that compares to building out new sites that you are aware of or leveraging in your modeling analysis? And also, just more generally, has there been any interest expressed about adding new reactors to sites? Because we've seen the repowering of certain sites, and it seems like that's, with Duane Arnold maybe being the last straggler, that may be tapped out with the repowering kind of queue that's available there. With the adding reactors to existing sites, is there interest in that currently? Are there any roadblocks to it, or are there anything you're doing, if there are roadblocks, to kind of resolve that and make that a possibility?
Yeah, so I will say that, for example, the study that DOE and the labs put out about new nuclear to existing nuclear sites really should underscore to us the totally different environment we're in about unprecedented electricity growth, because previously it was all about coal to nuclear, because it was just about replacing existing or retiring megawatts, right? And it's pretty recent that we're now in this, oh my God, we'll take as many gigawatts as we can get, as fast as we can get. So I was really excited to see the, quick and compelling work that the labs did just in the last few months on that. I have not yet seen cost estimates on what that would look like. I am very excited to see what that would look like, because we do have good examples of when you build multiple reactors, at the same site, how many benefits you get there. And also that our multi-unit sites are 30% cheaper to operate than our single unit sites, which is part of why so many of the ones that were closed early, like Palisades, were single unit sites. So I haven't yet seen those cost estimates, but there is definitely interest. So, Holtec, for example, is planning to put SMRs at the Palisades site in Virginia. The RFP that went out is for North Anna. So that is the existing nuclear site that has room for more reactors. And I think that there have been a couple of other announcements, but, it is most sites that have room for more reactors. And I'll say that, the studies that came out are, basically desktop reviews. So we're going to need more work there. But I think it looks at the existing boundary. A lot of these sites, you can see there's like a lot of undeveloped land right around there, where if you really were trying to figure out where you could, put 2 or 4 AP1000s, like there's likely a lot of land and resources available.
Hey, Julie, back on your slides, there was one slide that had a fair amount of information just referencing HALEU. Saw the announcement earlier today, TerraPower and a number of companies, Framatome, some others mentioned. Do you want to take a moment just to talk about fuel manufacturing and that kind of being a long pole in the tent? And is there anything else kind of coming through LPO or other parts of DOE that you can foreshadow without overdoing it?
Yeah, I mean, I will once again reiterate that like the long pole in the tent really is the fear the cost overrun, and for everyone except the AP 1000, the design completion work that's really important to get done before you start construction, right? But it was very exciting that Congress put $2.72 billion towards developing a domestic fuel supply chain, and that is for both HALEU, so the high assay low enriched uranium, and a lot of the non-light water Gen 4 reactors use, as well as LEU low enriched uranium that's close to 5% that current operating light water reactors use. And so there is a lot of real investment and commitment from the federal government in building out a domestic supply chain, and one that is supported and bolstered by our allied partners and friends with efforts like, the 405. So I hope that action from Congress and the administration in the last few months has been able to put to bed the idea that fuel will be a long pole in the tent, because there really are commitment and resources there. We have other issues to tackle and lots of hard work to do, but there's been quite a lot of money and attention on fuel.
Great. Okay, I'm going to Blair Woodring with a question for Glenn.
Yes, hi. Thanks for doing that. Hey, yeah, I was interested in your comment about Virginia wanting to build out a supply chain. We're in Pennsylvania, and we're having this. We've been requested to participate in that conversation up here. I've been down to some of the sites near Hampton Roads that are on the water. If you guys are sponsoring something, I'd like to, or interested in that, it'd be great to communicate with you, because we're looking at expansion, specifically around commercial nuclear.
100%. No, I saw your comment, Blair. Would love to get together on this. I don't know if you're already working with someone at Virginia Economic Development Partnership. I've had conversation with the guys over there about fabrication, and no, we'd be very interested. So have you talked to anyone at VEDP as of yet?
No, I have not. I wasn't aware of that entity. So
okay, great. Let's hook up anytime after this or tomorrow. Brian will put us together, and
Yep.
Would you please? I'd appreciate it. That sounds good. Thank you very much.
We're in the people connecting business here, so
okay.
Anything we can do to get more conversations underway in deployment. I'll just we're done with questions. I know we have a number of different industry folks on the line. If anyone has an announcement or anything that they want to share or follow up on anything, please unmute, and we'll give you a moment to say your comment before we close out this program. So I'll wait 5 seconds to see if anyone's.
Yeah, I have to be able to unmute them, so they'll have to like either raise their virtual hand or put something in the chat.
Okay. So if you got anything, raise your virtual hand. While we're waiting on that, I just do want to remind folks again, please check out the UCAN Power website, which is ucanpower.org. Our draft executive order and nuclear energy security strategy is posted there. Again, that's a project that we undertook as a way to start to line out what are the items, the areas of focus that the federal government should be zeroing in on to, again, continue support of deployment of more reactors. We started UCAN Power very much focused on getting DOE and DOD more closely working together, but as over the past couple of years, there's obviously been a lot of interest and excitement coming from the commercial sector as well, and we continue to grow out those policy options and ideas for policymakers, members of Congress, et cetera, to take a look at. So, David, did anyone raise their hand? No one? Okay.
I don't see anyone. Nope.
Okay. So, Julie and Glenn, I just ask you, if you have any closing remarks, you're welcome to give them. And if not, I will thank you both very much for your time and your commitment to sharing the information and the hard work that you guys are undertaking each and every day on behalf of those of us who are interested in nuclear energy, having a larger and more strategic and important role, not just here in the U.S., obviously, but globally. A lot of great opportunity, and do appreciate your time.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I got a couple questions about the slides. They are available right now at liftoff.energy.gov. There you can find not just nuclear, but the other technologies. But no, otherwise, thank you, Brian and team. Really, really enjoyed the discussion.
Brian,
Just download the nuclear one. The other stuff is, that's just extra reading. So, Glenn, anything else?
No, Brian, I appreciate the time. If anyone's on here that wants to build an SMR, that wants the data center in Virginia, or that wants to bring the supply chain, I mean, our governor's a business guy. He's ready to do deals. So I have to plug this tape, but thanks for having us, Brian. Appreciate it.
Great. Okay, and on behalf of the board of directors of UCAN Power and my colleagues, David and Jeff, Jim Howe, I saw Bud Albright earlier, Ted Garish, our president, and I think there was a few others. I'm sorry, I'm going to miss some of you, but really do appreciate it. Everyone joining today's call. Mary Alice, so a few others. So again, ucanpower.org when you have an opportunity and look for more information. And we look forward to seeing you in the future. Take care.